Let's discuss physical changes and health in later life. In terms of physiological changes, we see that neuronal changes are common in older age. If you guys remember, a neuron is just a nerve cell in the brain. So these cells are changing. And one area where we see change are in these declining neurotransmitter levels. So the neurotransmitters are the chemicals that allow neurons to communicate with each other. So these levels of neurotransmitters are declining with age. When levels are inadequate, nerve impulses then travel more slowly. And these nerve impulses are involved in almost every bodily function, from moving to thinking to breathing. So as these neurotransmitter levels decline, we see that reaction time declines, and physiologically there's declines as well. We also see the appearance of neurotic plaques and neurofibrillary tangles. So these plaques and tangles also affect the brain physiologically. So plaques are these structural changes in the brain that are produced when damaged and dying neurons collect around a core of a protein. Tangles are these spiral-shaped masses that form when fibers that compose the axon become twisted together. So these plaques and tangles are definitely not good for brain functioning, and we see an increase of plaques and tangles when it comes to Alzheimer's, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So neurons, there's just an overall loss of neurons. Neurons are lost, especially in the prefrontal cortex. And remember, this is associated with executive functioning. Neurons are lost in the corpus callosum, that part of the brain that connects both hemispheres. In the cerebellum, which is involved for balance. And then we also see a loss in glial cells, which kind of glue everything together in the brain. The good news about this is that the brain can overcome some of this decline. In several studies, growth of neural fibers in the brains of older adults were unaffected by illness that occurred. It was not any more affected than middle-aged people. So research indicates that neurogenesis, which is the production of new neurons, neurogenesis in the hippocampus is possible. And there are certain things that you can do to help promote neurogenesis. Drinking red wine, eating dark chocolate, exercising, even eating crunchy foods, doing crossword puzzles, or things like Sudoku have all been shown to promote neurogenesis. So fMRI evidence shows that older people who do well on cognitive tasks show widely distributed activity across all areas of the cerebral cortex. And what this suggests then is that older adults are also compensating for neuron loss by calling on additional brain regions to support cognitive processing. So this is the good news. It's possible to continue to produce neurons in the brain even into later life, particularly in the hippocampus, which is associated with memory. So that's some recent research that's come out. At the same time, your brain adapts to these changes in neuron loss. So other areas of your brain that maybe weren't activated when you were younger are activated now to help kind of compensate for those declines. So dementia is really a family of diseases that causes severe behavioral and cognitive impairment. Now, Alzheimer's is one form of dementia. So Alzheimer's disease is really the most common form of irreversible dementia. So Alzheimer's and related diseases involve very large changes in declining neurotransmitter levels and those plaques and tangles. So the key symptoms of Alzheimer's disease include gradual declines in memory, learning, attention, and judgment, confusion as to time and place, difficulties in communicating and finding the right words to say, declines in personal hygiene and self-care skills, inappropriate social behavior, and personality changes. And what we see is that these symptoms usually worsen gradually, but rates vary considerably across individuals. So another physiological change going on in the body is cardiovascular and respiratory changes. Now, these are a normative age-related change. So in the heart, for example, the cardiovascular system, we see that it begins to accumulate these fat deposits, and this stiffens the heart muscle tissue. So the heart muscle is really less healthy, but this less healthy muscle is needing to work a lot harder than it used to keep blood flowing. So 50% of adults over age 65 have hypertension, which is that high blood pressure. We also see that there is this decline in aerobic capacity or the ability to cope with physical exertion. So by about age 65, the average adult sees a 60 to 75% decline. But this is going to be much smaller in people who have been in good physical shape their whole lives and have continued to exercise. So cardiovascular disease is the leading killer of older folks in the U.S. Actually, every 33 seconds, an American dies from cardiovascular disease. So the lungs are also changing over time. By age 85, the maximum amount of air we can take in, which is your lung capacity, has decreased by 40%. And that decline has started in our 20s. So the oxygen that we take in the air is the same oxygen that we've talked about being so important for cellular respiration, like when we were talking about the cardiovascular disease. So these changes here are very negative when it comes to overall physiological health, and we see that it's also going to be related to cognitive decline. So for example, adults with hypertension are actually three more times likely to die of heart disease, and this can then lead to cognitive impairments like poor attention, poor memory, difficulty learning or perceiving things well. So what we see is that even hypertension predicts cognitive decline. So even though these are physiological changes, they are absolutely going to affect the individual cognitively.